Alex Reed slipped into his usual seat at the back corner of combat theory class, hoping nobody would notice he was 3 minutes late again. The massive lecture hall buzzed with conversations in at least 12 different languages, while holographic displays showed tactical formations floating above each desk. His human ears picked out fragments of Brutari growls discussing siege tactics, Sylph whistles analyzing speed formations, and the strange humming sounds that Mentari used when they were thinking hard about something. Professor Stone taught this class, a retired Brutari general whose gray scales bore scars from battles across 3 star systems. Today's lesson focused on planetary defense strategies, and Alex watched quietly as his classmates eagerly participated in discussions about shield generators, orbital bombardments, and troop deployments. When Stone called on him to answer a question about defensive choke points, Alex gave a simple textbook response that earned him a neutral nod before the professor moved on to more enthusiastic students. Nobody expected much from Alex Reed. His test scores consistently hovered around 70%, just high enough to avoid remedial classes but nowhere near the 90-plus averages that his classmates maintained. During physical training, he finished in the middle of the pack. In weapons practice, he demonstrated competence without excellence. Even his appearance seemed designed to fade into the background. Average height, brown hair, clothes that always looked slightly wrinkled despite the Academy's strict uniform standards. The Galactic Defense Academy attracted the best from 17 different species. Vera Stoneheart could punch through reinforced steel with her bare fists. Bolt Swiftwind moved so fast that security cameras sometimes failed to track him during sprinting exercises. Luna Mindbender could lift objects with her thoughts while simultaneously solving complex mathematical equations. These were the genetic elite, the apex predators of their respective civilizations, destined to become admirals and generals who would protect the galaxy from threats both internal and external. Alex Reed was just along for the ride, or so it seemed to anyone who bothered to pay attention to him. Combat simulations took place every Tuesday in the Academy's training complex, a massive underground facility that could recreate any battlefield environment from desert planets to asteroid mining stations. Students were randomly assigned to teams and given objectives that ranged from simple elimination matches to complex multi-stage scenarios involving civilian evacuation and resource management. Alex usually ended up on whichever team needed an extra body to balance the numbers. This particular Tuesday found him paired with 3 Sylph cadets who clearly considered his presence a handicap they would have to overcome. The scenario involved defending a communication relay station from waves of automated attackers, with points awarded for both successful defense and efficient resource utilization. Alex's teammates, Rush, Swift, and Blur, immediately began planning elaborate hit-and-run tactics that would utilize their natural speed advantages. "Human, you guard the central console," Rush announced without looking at Alex. "Try not to get in our way when the real fighting starts." Alex nodded and took his position at the communications hub while his teammates dispersed to establish their ambush points. The simulation began with a low warning tone, and enemy units started materializing at the complex's outer perimeters. They looked like standard military drones, armed with energy weapons and programmed with basic tactical algorithms designed to provide challenging but not overwhelming opposition. The first wave approached from the North Corridor, where Swift had positioned himself behind a barrier of storage containers. Alex watched through the security feeds as Swift demonstrated the incredible reflexes that made Sylph such effective warriors, darting between cover points and disabling 3 drones before they could properly target him. Rush and Blur performed similar feats in their assigned sectors, their movements blurring on the surveillance screens as they outmaneuvered and destroyed their opponents with elegant efficiency. Meanwhile, Alex stood quietly at his post, monitoring communication frequencies and tracking ammunition expenditure. To any observer, he appeared to be doing exactly what was expected of him, staying out of the way while more capable teammates handled the real work. But Alex's eyes moved constantly, tracking drone movement patterns, noting response times, analyzing the tactical algorithms that governed enemy behavior. The second wave arrived with different programming, attempting to learn from the first group's failures. These drones moved more cautiously, used coordinated flanking maneuvers, and demonstrated improved targeting systems. Swift found himself pinned down behind inadequate cover, when 3 drones converged on his position simultaneously. His speed wasn't enough when enemies could predict his likely movement paths and lay down suppressing fire accordingly. "Need assistance in Sector 3? Swift's voice crackled through the communications system, strain evident in his typically confident tone. Rush and Blur were engaged with their own problems, facing similar adaptive behavior from their opponents. The simulation was designed to escalate in difficulty, forcing students to think beyond their species' natural advantages and develop genuine tactical skills. Many teams failed at this stage, overwhelmed when their initial strategies proved insufficient against more sophisticated opposition. Alex glanced at the tactical display showing his teammates' positions, ammunition levels, and the approaching third wave of enemies that would arrive in 90 seconds. His fingers moved across the communication console, accessing functions that most students never bothered to learn. Within moments, he had tapped into the facility's environmental controls, security systems, and maintenance networks. "Swift, move. To your left in 3 seconds. Alex's quiet voice came through the comm system. "What? Why would I?" The lights in Swift's corridor went out just as Alex had predicted, creating the darkness that Sylph vision was adapted to exploit. Swift instinctively moved left, directly into a position where he could strike at 3 confused drones who had lost their primary targeting system. The lights came back on 2 seconds later, illuminating the remains of disabled enemies and a very confused Sylph cadet. "Rush, there's a maintenance shaft opening behind you in 5 seconds. Use it." Rush spun around to see a panel sliding open in the wall, revealing a passage that led directly behind the drone formation that had him trapped. He slipped through just as energy bolts filled the space where he had been standing, emerging in the perfect position to attack his enemies from an unexpected angle. Similar guidance reached Blur at exactly the right moment, directing him to a supply cache containing more effective weapons just before his ammunition ran critically low. Each instruction was precise, perfectly timed, and delivered in Alex's same unremarkable tone that made it seem like he was simply relaying routine information rather than orchestrating a complex tactical victory. The third wave arrived to find themselves facing opponents who seemed to anticipate their every move. Drones that had been programmed with adaptive algorithms found their adaptations countered before they could implement them. Flanking maneuvers led into carefully prepared ambushes. Superior numbers became a disadvantage when concentrated enemy forces could be redirected into choke points and eliminated efficiently. When the simulation ended, Alex's team had achieved the highest score in the class, with 0 casualties and minimal resource expenditure. Swift, Rush, and Blur congratulated each other on their excellent performance, barely acknowledging Alex's contribution beyond a grudging thanks for his lucky calls on the communication system. Professor Stone reviewed the simulation recordings with interest, noting the unusual coordination displayed by what should have been an inferior team. But Alex had been careful to make his contributions seem like fortunate timing rather than tactical genius. The environmental system malfunctions appeared random. The maintenance access panels opened according to scheduled maintenance routines that just happened to align with tactical needs. The supply cache locations were clearly marked in the facility documentation, available to anyone who bothered to read the technical manuals thoroughly. After class, Alex walked back to his dormitory, room through corridors filled with excited conversations about the day's simulations. Other teams discussed their failures and successes, analyzing what had gone wrong and planning improvements for next time. Nobody discussed Alex's performance because nobody had noticed anything worth discussing. He had been exactly what everyone expected, a quiet human who followed orders and stayed out of trouble. In his room, Alex sat at his desk and opened his personal computer, accessing databases that contained detailed information about Brutari combat psychology, Sylph tactical preferences, and Mentari decision-making patterns. He cross-referenced this information with performance data from today's simulations, building comprehensive profiles of his classmates' abilities, limitations, and behavioral tendencies. The files he maintained would have surprised anyone who discovered them. Detailed analyses of every species in the Academy, complete breakdowns of their military doctrines, historical patterns of their strategic thinking, and psychological profiles that delved deep into the cultural factors that influenced their approach to warfare. This was not the kind of research that a mediocre student with barely passing grades should have been conducting. But then again, Alex Reed was not the kind of student that anyone at the Galactic Defense Academy understood. He was something else entirely, hiding in plain sight while learning everything he could about the civilizations that surrounded humanity among the stars. And tomorrow, he would return to his corner seat, answer questions with textbook responses, and continue his patient, methodical study of the galaxy's most dangerous beings. Because Alex Reed had plans that extended far beyond graduation from the academy. He was preparing for a future that he hoped would never come, but that his analysis of galactic politics suggested was inevitable. And when that future arrived, humanity would not face it unprepared. 3 weeks after the communication relay simulation, Agent Cypher received the assignment that would change her understanding of threat assessment forever. The Sylph intelligence operative had spent decades infiltrating enemy organizations, gathering secrets from the darkest corners of the galaxy, and eliminating targets that posed risks to galactic stability. None of that experience had prepared her for surveillance duty at a military academy, watching a human cadet who barely registered on anyone else's attention. The briefing materials were sparse but troubling. Alex Reed had been flagged by the Academy's AI monitoring system for statistical anomalies that defied explanation. His biometric readings during combat exercises showed stress responses that were completely inconsistent with his performance levels. His tactical decision-making demonstrated pattern recognition abilities that exceeded the parameters established for human cognitive function. Most concerning of all, his academic performance appeared to be deliberately calibrated to avoid scrutiny rather than reflect his actual capabilities. Cypher had observed enough suspects to recognize the signs of someone with secrets to hide. What made Alex different was the sophistication of his concealment methods. Most people trying to hide their abilities made obvious mistakes, inconsistencies in their cover stories, moments where their true skills leaked through, behavioral patterns that revealed their deception. Alex Reed displayed none of these tells. His mediocrity was so perfectly crafted that it had taken an AI analysis of thousands of data points to identify the mathematical impossibility of his consistency. Her first week of observation yielded frustrating results. Alex attended classes, completed assignments, participated in training exercises, and socialized with his dormitory neighbors in ways that seemed completely ordinary. He ate meals in the cafeteria, studied in the library, and spent his free time reading technical manuals that aligned with his stated academic interests. Nothing about his routine suggested anything more dangerous than a dedicated but untalented student trying his best to meet academy standards. The breakthrough came during a routine night training exercise in the combat complex. Students were assigned individual scenarios designed to test their ability to operate independently under stress. Alex drew what instructors considered one of the more challenging setups, a maze-like environment filled with automated opponents, environmental hazards, and time pressure that forced quick decision-making over careful analysis. Cypher positioned herself in the observation booth, using her phase-shifting abilities to remain undetected while maintaining visual contact with her target. The exercise began with Alex entering the maze through the designated starting point, carrying standard equipment, and facing the same obstacles that had challenged dozens of other cadets throughout the semester. What happened next defied rational explanation. Alex moved through the maze like he had memorized its layout. Despite having never seen this particular configuration before, he avoided detection by automated sentries that operated on unpredictable patrol patterns. He navigated around environmental traps that were designed to be invisible until triggered. Most unnaturally, he seemed to anticipate the location and timing of mobile obstacles that were controlled by random number generators. Cypher watched in growing amazement as Alex completed a course that typically took students 40 minutes in just under 18 minutes, with zero detection events and minimal equipment usage. More disturbing than his speed was his apparent lack of effort. He moved with casual confidence, never hesitating at decision points, never showing surprise at unexpected obstacles, never displaying the tension that characterized other students' attempts at the same exercise. The next morning brought even more concerning developments. Dr. Cross, the Academy's head physician, requested an emergency consultation with Academy leadership regarding Alex's latest medical examination. The results were unprecedented in her 15 years of treating multiple species at the Academy. Alex's nervous system showed adaptations that shouldn't exist in baseline humans, with neural pathway efficiency that approached theoretical maximums for carbon-based intelligence. His reflexes operate faster than his conscious mind should be, able to process incoming information, Dr. Cross explained to Commander Ironscale and the assembled faculty. We're seeing reaction times that suggest he's responding to stimuli before his sensory organs have finished transmitting the relevant data to his brain. It's neurologically impossible, according to everything we understand about human physiology. More detailed testing revealed even more disturbing discoveries. Alex's muscle memory showed perfect retention of combat techniques after single exposure, with improvement curves that suggested he was unconsciously optimizing movements he had never practiced. His spatial reasoning abilities tested at levels typically associated with AI navigation systems. Most troubling of all, brain scans during tactical exercises showed parallel processing patterns that resembled the computational architecture of military supercomputers rather than organic neural networks. Cypher expanded her surveillance to include Alex's classmates, hoping to understand how others perceived the subject of her investigation. The results painted a picture of someone who was simultaneously invisible and impossible to ignore. Students rarely mentioned Alex in casual conversation, but when pressed for details, they could describe his behavior with unusual precision. He was the cadet who always seemed to be in the right place during group exercises, the study partner who never provided direct answers, but somehow helped others find solutions to complex problems. The teammate who never took leadership roles but whose quiet suggestions invariably improved group performance. The pattern became clearer during a large-scale tactical exercise designed to simulate planetary defense scenarios. 200 cadets were divided into attacking and defending forces, with victory conditions that required coordination between multiple species and specialization groups. Alex was assigned to the defending team's logistics coordination section, a position that involved managing supply lines and resource allocation rather than direct combat operations. Cypher observed from multiple vantage points as the exercise unfolded over 3 days of continuous operations. The defending force should have been overwhelmed within hours. The attacking team included some of the Academy's most talented individual combatants, led by students who had demonstrated exceptional leadership abilities in previous exercises. Instead, the defense held firm despite facing superior numbers and firepower, with supply lines that remained intact despite constant pressure from enemy forces. The key to their success became apparent through careful analysis of communication, logs, and movement patterns. Alex had been coordinating defensive operations through a network of subtle suggestions, resource distribution decisions, and logistical recommendations that created a web of mutual support throughout the defending force. He never issued direct orders or claimed credit for strategic decisions, but his fingerprints were on every successful defensive action. More unnervingly, Alex appeared to have predicted the attacking force's strategy with perfect accuracy. Supply caches were pre-positioned exactly where they would be needed. Defensive positions were reinforced moments before coming under assault. Reserve forces were deployed to counter flanking maneuvers before those maneuvers were launched. The defending team fought like they had access to the attacking team's battle plans, but security protocols made such intelligence leaks impossible. The exercise concluded with the attacking force achieving none of their primary objectives despite overwhelming advantages in personnel and equipment. Post-exercise analysis revealed coordination patterns among the defending forces that exceeded anything previously demonstrated by Academy students. When questioned about their performance, defending team leaders consistently credited their success to good teamwork and lucky breaks, apparently unaware that their actions had been guided by an invisible coordinating intelligence. Cypher submitted her preliminary report with recommendations for enhanced surveillance. The subject displayed capabilities that posed potential risks to galactic security, but determining the nature and extent of those risks would require more comprehensive investigation. Alex Reed was not just an unusually talented student. He was something unprecedented, operating at levels of tactical and strategic sophistication that challenged fundamental assumptions about human cognitive limitations. The report triggered immediate action from the highest levels of Galactic Intelligence Services. Within days, additional operatives were assigned to the investigation, including specialists in psychological warfare, strategic analysis, and xenobiology. The quiet human cadet who sat in the back corner of his classes had become the focus of the most comprehensive threat assessment operation in the Academy's history. But Alex continued his routine of mediocre test scores, average physical performance, and unremarkable social interactions, giving no indication that he was aware of the intense scrutiny focused on his every action. If anything, his behavior became even more perfectly ordinary, as if the increased attention had triggered some kind of adaptive camouflage response that made him fade further into the background of Academy life. The Watchers had found their target, but they were beginning to realize that Alex Reed might have been aware of their presence long before they had discovered his existence. The question that kept Cypher awake during her off-duty hours was simple, but terrifying. If Alex knew he was being watched and was allowing the surveillance to continue, what did he hope to accomplish by revealing his capabilities to Galactic Intelligence Services? The answer to that question would prove to be far more disturbing than any of the Watchers could have imagined. High Admiral Voidborn arrived at the Academy before dawn, her personal transport touching down on the restricted landing pad with the kind of silence that spoke of military-grade stealth technology. She brought with her a sealed container that required 2 separate authorization codes to open, containing testing protocols that existed in only 3 copies throughout the entire Galactic Defense Network. The contents of that container would determine whether Alex Reed represented humanity's greatest contribution to galactic security, or its most dangerous threat to everything the Alliance had built. The Admiral had spent her career making impossible decisions under impossible circumstances. She had authorized planetary evacuations, commanded fleets against overwhelming odds, and signed death warrants for people she had once considered friends. None of those experiences had prepared her for the decision she now faced regarding a 19-year-old human cadet whose psychological profile read like science fiction. Alex was summoned to sub-level 15 of the Academy's command complex, a section of the facility that most students never knew existed. The corridor he walked down contained blast doors rated to withstand direct hits from orbital bombardment systems, biometric scanners that could identify individuals by their genetic signatures, and automated defense systems that could eliminate perceived threats in microseconds. At the end of this corridor waited a testing chamber that had been constructed specifically for scenarios too dangerous to conduct anywhere else. Admiral Voidborn met Alex personally at the chamber entrance, studying his face for any sign of the extraordinary intelligence that surveillance reports credited him with possessing. She saw only a tired-looking student who appeared slightly confused about why he had been called away from his morning classes. His demeanor was respectful, but unremarkable, exactly what she would have expected from any cadet suddenly summoned to meet with Fleet Command. Cadet Reed, you have been selected to participate in an advanced tactical assessment, the Admiral explained, her voice carrying the formal tone she used for official business. This evaluation will test your decision-making, abilities under extreme pressure using scenarios drawn from actual military operations. Your performance will be recorded and analyzed by senior command staff. Alex nodded politely, asking no questions about why he had been chosen or what criteria would be used to evaluate his performance. His acceptance of the situation seemed natural, almost expected, as if being subjected to unprecedented testing procedures was a normal part of Academy life. The Admiral made note of his reaction in her mental assessment file. Either Alex was remarkably adaptable to unusual circumstances, or he had been anticipating something like this. The testing chamber contained the most advanced tactical simulation system in galactic space, capable of processing millions of variables simultaneously, while maintaining perfect realism in its environmental representations. The scenario Alex would face was called the Apex Gauntlet, a simulation based on the Battle of Kepler Station, where a small defensive force had faced impossible odds against an overwhelming enemy assault. The simulation had been run by the galaxy's finest military minds with the best recorded performance managing to delay inevitable defeat by 6 hours and 14 minutes. Alex was given command of Kepler Station's defensive forces, 50 mixed personnel from various species, limited ammunition, aging defensive systems, and no possibility of reinforcement. The attacking force consisted of 300 elite assault troops equipped with cutting-edge weapons and supported by orbital fire support. Historical records showed that the actual battle had lasted less than 4 hours, with complete defensive collapse occurring when ammunition supplies were exhausted. The simulation began with Alex studying tactical displays that showed his hopeless situation in precise detail. Enemy forces were approaching from 3 directions simultaneously. His defensive positions were poorly situated for the kind of assault he faced, and his personnel included several species that had documented histories of mutual antagonism that could lead to command breakdown under stress. What followed challenged every assumption that military theorists held about tactical problem-solving. Alex didn't attempt to optimize his defensive positions or concentrate his firepower for maximum effectiveness. Instead, he began implementing what appeared to be a surrender strategy, broadcasting communications toward the approaching enemy forces that contained detailed information about his defensive capabilities, personnel numbers, and ammunition supplies. Admiral Voidborn watched from the observation deck with growing confusion, as Alex essentially provided enemy commanders with intelligence that should have guaranteed swift defeat. The attacking forces responded by adjusting their assault plans to account for the new information, concentrating their efforts on positions Alex had identified as critical defensive points. But Alex's communications contained subtle inaccuracies that became apparent only as the battle developed. He had understated the defensive capabilities of certain positions while overstating others, creating false intelligence that led enemy forces to commit resources against targets that turned out to be heavily defended decoys. Meanwhile, his actual defensive strong points remained concealed and undetected, allowing small groups of defenders to strike at enemy forces that had been misdirected by their own intelligence advantages. More unnervingly, Alex demonstrated perfect understanding of the psychological profiles of the enemy commanders he was facing. His deception tactics were tailored to exploit specific decision-making patterns that he shouldn't have had any way of knowing about. He manipulated their confidence levels, played on their assumptions about human tactical thinking, and created scenarios where their natural aggression worked against their strategic objectives. The simulation reached its critical turning point when Alex orchestrated what appeared to be a catastrophic defensive collapse, with his forces retreating in disarray from their primary positions. Enemy forces pressed their apparent advantage, committing their reserves to pursue what they believed to be a rooted opponent. Instead, they found themselves channeled into carefully prepared killing zones where Alex's retreating forces had established interlocking fields of fire that turned the enemy's numerical advantage into a fatal disadvantage. Within 3 hours, Alex had not only survived the scenario that was designed to be unwinnable, he had achieved complete tactical victory with minimal losses among his defensive forces. The enemy assault force had been eliminated or captured. Their supporting elements had been neutralized by precise strikes against critical systems, and Kepler Station remained under defensive control with ammunition supplies still available for continued operations. The simulation supervisors immediately ran comprehensive diagnostics, convinced that system errors had produced impossible results. They found no malfunctions, no programming glitches, and no external interference that could explain Alex's performance. When they ran the scenario again with modified parameters designed to counter his previous tactics, Alex adapted his approach completely, demonstrating that his initial victory hadn't been the result of memorized solutions or lucky guesses. General Bloodclaw, the Academy's commandant and a warrior whose reputation had been built over decades of successful campaigns, requested a private meeting with Alex immediately after the simulation concluded. The general's office contained battle trophies from conflicts spanning the entire known galaxy, artifacts that represented victories over enemies who had challenged the foundations of civilized space. "Explain to me how you achieved what you just achieved," the general said without preamble, his scarred face showing none of the diplomatic courtesy typically extended to cadets. Alex considered the question for several seconds before responding with characteristic quietness. "I didn't try to win the scenario as it was presented. I changed the fundamental assumptions that made it unwinnable. Elaborate. The simulation was designed around the premise that the defending force would fight defensively, using established tactical doctrines that prioritize resource conservation and positional advantage. The attacking force was programmed to counter those approaches because that's how the historical battle developed. I fought an offensive campaign using deception and psychological warfare instead of defensive tactics. General Bloodclaw leaned back in his chair, studying Alex with the intensity he typically reserved for threat assessments of enemy commanders. You're telling me that you identified the simulation's underlying assumptions and deliberately violated them to achieve tactical advantage? Yes, sir. And you developed your counter-strategy in real time, with no advanced knowledge of the scenario parameters? Yes, sir. The general was quiet for a long moment, processing implications that extended far beyond academy testing procedures. Cadet Reed, are you performing below your actual capabilities in your regular coursework? Alex met the general's gaze directly for the first time during their conversation. Yes, sir. Why? The answer that followed would haunt General Bloodclaw for the rest of his career. Alex Reed explained in the same quiet tone he used for everything else that he had been deliberately maintaining mediocre performance to avoid exactly the kind of attention he was now receiving. He had studied the psychological profiles of every species in the Galactic Alliance, analyzing their historical responses to potential threats and their documented patterns of dealing with individuals or groups they perceived as dangerous. When people see a weapon, they either want to use it or destroy it, Alex said simply. I prefer to remain a person. The implications of that statement sent cold recognition through the general's combat-hardened mind. Alex hadn't just been hiding his capabilities. He had been analyzing the entire galactic civilization as a potential threat to humanity's survival. His studies at the Academy weren't about learning to defend the Alliance, they were about learning to defend against it. Later that evening, Admiral Voidborn reviewed surveillance footage from Alex's off-duty activities, seeing patterns that had been invisible before her understanding of his true capabilities. His research in the Academy's archives wasn't random academic curiosity. It was systematic intelligence gathering, focused on military capabilities, strategic doctrines, and psychological weaknesses of every major civilized species. Alex Reed wasn't just the most tactically gifted individual she had ever encountered. He was potentially the most dangerous person in galactic space, and he had been hiding among humanity's brightest young people while conducting what amounted to a comprehensive threat assessment of everyone except his own species. The question that kept the Admiral awake that night was simple but terrifying. If Alex Reed represented typical human potential rather than a unique anomaly, what did that mean for the future of galactic civilization? And if he was unique, what were his plans for the intelligence he had been gathering? The answers to those questions would prove to be far more complex and frightening than anyone in the galactic defense establishment could have imagined. The emergency session of the Galactic Defense Council convened in absolute secrecy, with representatives from 12 major civilizations gathering in a chamber designed to prevent any form of electronic surveillance or unauthorized recording. Admiral Voidborn stood before the assembled leaders, knowing that her next words could fundamentally alter the balance of power that had maintained galactic peace for over 2 centuries. We have identified what may be either humanity's greatest gift to our alliance or the most significant threat we have ever faced, she began, her voice carrying the weight of decisions that could affect billions of lives. The subject is a single individual, but our analysis suggests he may represent capabilities that exist throughout the human population. The council chamber erupted in multilingual discussions as representatives processed this information. Elder, Skywing of the Phoenix Collective raised a feathered appendage for attention. Admiral, are you suggesting that humans have been concealing military capabilities from their allies? I'm suggesting that humans may possess military capabilities they themselves don't fully understand, Admiral Voidborn replied. And at least one of them has been studying us with the thoroughness of someone preparing for eventual conflict. Within hours of the council session, a covert task force was assembled with a mandate that terrified everyone involved in its creation. Their mission was to assess whether Alex Reed could be controlled, contained, or if he represented a threat requiring immediate elimination before he could share his knowledge with other humans. The team included the Alliance's most capable operatives, individuals whose combined abilities had resolved conflicts that threatened entire star systems. Captain Steele commanded the operation, a cybernetically enhanced human whose loyalty to the Alliance had been proven through decades of service in conflicts that never appeared in official records. His body contained enough technological augmentation to qualify him as a living weapon system, with reflexes enhanced beyond baseline human limitations and tactical processing capabilities that approached artificial intelligence levels. Shadow accompanied him, a sylph assassin whose mastery of dimensional phasing allowed her to move through solid matter as if it didn't exist. Her kill record included targets that had been considered untouchable by conventional means, eliminated through techniques that left investigators unable to determine how the deaths had occurred. Tank provided heavy assault capabilities, a Brutari, warrior whose personal armor system could withstand direct hits from vehicle-mounted weapons while maintaining full mobility. His combat record included single-handed victories against enemy formations that should have required entire companies to engage successfully. Mind completed the team, a Mentari combat psychic whose telekinetic abilities could manipulate battlefield environments while simultaneously conducting mental warfare against enemy commanders. Her psychological profile indicated willingness to employ tactics that other species considered ethically questionable, but militarily necessary. The task force infiltrated the academy during the annual War Games, a month-long exercise where students were divided into competing factions and engaged in large-scale tactical scenarios across multiple planetary environments. These exercises traditionally provided cover for various intelligence operations, as the chaos of mock warfare created opportunities for covert activities that would be impossible during normal academy operations. Alex had been assigned to the traditionally weaker Defender faction, facing an aggressor force that included many of the Academy's most individually capable students. The exercise parameters were designed to simulate realistic military scenarios, where superior firepower and advanced technology had to be countered through tactical innovation and strategic thinking. What the task force witnessed over the following weeks defied every assumption they held about command capabilities and tactical genius. Alex didn't lead through charisma or intimidation. He coordinated his diverse forces through precise understanding of each species' psychological makeup and natural abilities. He positioned aggressive Brutari cadets as decoys that drew enemy attention while more subtle operatives maneuvered into advantageous positions. He used sylph speedsters as living communication networks that maintained coordination between widely separated units. He deployed Mentari psychics as battlefield coordinators whose mental abilities created real-time intelligence sharing throughout his forces. More disturbing than his tactical innovation was his apparent ability to predict enemy strategies with perfect accuracy. Every move the aggressor force made had been anticipated and countered before it was implemented. The exercise became less a military simulation and more a demonstration of how completely Alex understood the thinking patterns of every species represented in the Academy. Captain Steele attempted direct intervention during a night assault scenario, using his enhanced capabilities to engage Alex in single combat while his teammates were occupied with other objectives. The confrontation lasted less than 3 minutes and ended with Steele disabled but unharmed, his cybernetic system somehow reprogrammed to prevent hostile actions while leaving all other functions intact. Alex's response to the obvious assassination attempt was delivered in the same quiet tone he used for classroom discussions. "Tell Admiral Voidborn that if the Council decides to eliminate me, they should send everything they have at once. Half measures will only teach me how to fight more efficiently." The implications of that statement sent shockwaves through the task force. Alex had been aware of their operation from the beginning, had allowed them to observe his capabilities, and was now sending a message directly to the galactic leadership. More terrifyingly, his casual reference to fighting more efficiently suggested that everything they had witnessed so far represented a fraction of his actual abilities. Mind attempted to probe Alex's thoughts during a subsequent encounter, hoping to determine his true intentions and assess the threat level he represented. What she discovered in his mind broke her psychological conditioning and required immediate medical intervention to prevent permanent mental damage. Alex's consciousness didn't contain the typical thought patterns of a military genius. It contained detailed strategic assessments of every major installation, fleet deployment, and defensive network in galactic space. "He's not planning conquest," Mind reported during her debriefing, her voice showing strain that veteran psychics rarely experienced. "He's preparing for defense, but the scope of his preparation suggests he expects to face the entire galaxy as an enemy." The task force's investigation revealed the terrifying truth behind Alex's behavior at the Academy. He hadn't been hiding his capabilities to avoid attention. He had been conducting the most comprehensive intelligence analysis in galactic history, systematically studying every potential threat to humanity's survival. His research included detailed assessments of alien psychology, military doctrine, technological capabilities, and strategic weaknesses that would be invaluable in any conflict involving human survival. More unnervingly, Alex's preparation suggested that he considered such a conflict inevitable. His analysis of galactic politics, historical precedents, and species-level behavioral patterns had led him to conclude that humanity would eventually face systematic persecution once their true capabilities became known. Everything he had done at the Academy was preparation for that day. Captain Steele submitted his final report with recommendations that shocked even the task force members who had witnessed Alex's capabilities firsthand. The human cadet couldn't be contained through conventional means. His understanding of galactic military capabilities was too comprehensive for any prison or restriction to hold him. He couldn't be controlled through leverage or coercion. His psychological profile indicated absolute commitment to human survival that overrode all other considerations. Most disturbing of all, he couldn't be eliminated through covert action. Alex had demonstrated awareness of the task force's capabilities and had apparently been using their assassination attempts as training exercises to improve his own defensive skills. Any direct assault would only confirm his expectations about galactic hostility toward humanity and potentially trigger whatever contingency plans he had developed. The task force's conclusion was as simple as it was terrifying. Alex Reed represented a new form of human evolution, one that had been shaped by the unconscious recognition that humanity existed in a galaxy filled with potential enemies. He was what humans became when they fully understood their situation among the stars and prepared accordingly. The question facing the Galactic Defense Council was no longer whether Alex posed a threat to galactic stability. The question was whether they could afford to treat humanity as an enemy species, knowing that at least one human had been preparing for exactly that scenario with the thoroughness of someone who expected to face impossible odds and still intended to win. The answer to that question would determine whether the galaxy's future included humanity as allies or witnessed the emergence of the most dangerous adversary that civilized space had ever faced. The sealed chamber deep beneath the Academy's command center had been designed to contain discussions that could reshape galactic civilization. Representatives from every major species sat around a circular table that had witnessed the signing of peace treaties, the authorization of planetary evacuations, and the planning of campaigns that determined the fate of entire star systems. Today it would host a conversation that might decide whether humanity deserved a place among the stars or represented a threat too dangerous to tolerate. Alex Reed entered the chamber wearing his standard Academy uniform, appearing as unremarkable as he had on the day he first arrived for classes. His quiet demeanor and respectful posture suggested nothing more dangerous than a nervous student called before Academy administration for disciplinary action. The assembled representatives, however, knew they were facing something unprecedented in galactic history. Admiral Voidborn spoke first, her voice carrying the formal weight of official proceedings. "Cadet Reed, you stand before the Galactic Defense Council to address concerns about your activities and intentions. Are you prepared to answer questions regarding your capabilities and your plans for the intelligence you have gathered?" Alex nodded politely, taking the seat indicated for him at the table's center. "I'm prepared to discuss anything that concerns galactic security, Admiral. Though I should point out that the questions you ask will reveal as much about your intentions toward humanity as my answers will reveal about mine." The subtle warning in his response sent tension through the chamber. Commander Stormclaw of the Raptor Coalition leaned forward aggressively. You speak as if this council represents a threat to your species. We are your allies, bound by treaties and mutual defense agreements. Are you? Alex asked quietly. Because my analysis of interspecies communications suggests otherwise. Would you like me to present evidence of discussions about the human problem and preliminary planning for containment protocols? The silence that followed confirmed Alex's statement more effectively than any verbal admission could have. He reached into his uniform pocket and produced a data storage device, placing it on the table with deliberate care. This contains copies of classified communications between various species leadership, strategic assessments that classify humanity as a potential existential threat, and preliminary discussions about military actions that your own files describe as preventive measures. Elder Moonfeather of the Ancient Wisdom Collective activated the device with trembling appendages, her species' reputation for impartial judgment, making her the natural choice to review Alex's evidence. What she found in those files drained the color from her normally radiant plumage. Communications between military leaders discussing humanity's expansion rate, intelligence assessments warning about human adaptability and tactical innovation, strategic planning documents that outlined scenarios for limiting human population growth and restricting their access to advanced technologies. This cannot be authentic, General Ironback of the Defensive Alliance protested, though his voice lacked conviction. These communications were conducted through encrypted channels with security protocols that no individual should be able to breach. Alex's response was delivered in the same quiet tone he used for classroom discussions. General, your security protocols were designed to prevent infiltration by conventional intelligence operatives. They weren't designed to stop someone who spent 2 years systematically studying the psychological patterns of every cryptographer in your organization and learning to predict their decision-making algorithms. The implications of that statement struck the assembled representatives with devastating force. Alex hadn't just intercepted their communications, he had predicted the content of their discussions by analyzing the individuals involved and understanding their likely responses to specific stimuli. His intelligence gathering had been so comprehensive that he could anticipate classified conversations before they occurred. Elder Starlight of the Phoenix Collective raised a question that had been troubling her since Alex's evidence was presented. If you possess this intelligence about our intentions, why did you remain at the Academy? Why didn't you return to Earth and warn your government about potential threats? Alex's answer reframed the entire situation. Because Earth already knows. Humanity has been aware of galactic attitudes toward our species since our first diplomatic contacts. We've been preparing for eventual conflict since the day we joined your alliance. The revelation struck the chamber like a physical blow. Humanity hadn't stumbled blindly into a potentially hostile galaxy. They had recognized the threat from the beginning and had been conducting their own preparations accordingly. Alex Reed wasn't a unique anomaly. He was a representative of systematic human preparation for species-level survival warfare. You're saying that your entire species has been conducting intelligence operations against their allies? Admiral Voidborn asked, her voice showing strain that veteran officers rarely displayed. I'm saying that humans have been studying their environment and preparing for potential threats, which is what intelligent species do when they want to survive, Alex replied. The fact that you consider this hostile behavior rather than natural, caution tells me everything I need to know about your own intentions. Commander Stormclaw stood abruptly, his aggressive posture suggesting imminent violence. This is proof of human duplicity and justification for immediate containment actions. They've been planning war against their allies while accepting our protection and resources. Alex remained seated, showing no reaction to the physical threat. Commander, you're proving my point. Humanity prepares for potential conflict, and your immediate response is to discuss containment and elimination. Do you understand why we might have considered defensive preparations necessary? Elder Moonfeather studied the data files with growing comprehension. The human is correct. Our own communications reveal systematic discussion of military action against humanity, based on theoretical future threats rather than actual hostile actions. We have been planning to attack them for capabilities they might possess, rather than aggression they have demonstrated. The uncomfortable truth settled over the chamber like a suffocating blanket. The galaxy's major civilizations had been treating humanity as a threat requiring management rather than allies deserving trust, while simultaneously expecting human loyalty and cooperation. Their security concerns about human capabilities had created exactly the defensive preparations they feared, turning their suspicions into self-fulfilling prophecies. Admiral Voidborn made the decision that would define galactic politics for centuries to come. What do you want, Cadet Reed? What would it take for humanity to remain in the Alliance as genuine partners rather than preparing for defensive warfare? Alex's response was immediate and non-negotiable. Full equality in all Alliance decisions, complete transparency regarding military capabilities and strategic planning, and formal guarantees that no species will be subjected to containment or elimination based on theoretical future threats. Humanity will defend this galaxy with everything we possess, but we will never again hide what we are capable of. He stood slowly, his quiet demeanor unchanged, despite the magnitude of the moment. You can accept humanity as equals and allies, or you can treat us as enemies and learn why we've been preparing for that possibility. But you cannot continue treating us as managed junior partners while expecting gratitude and cooperation. The vote that followed would reshape galactic civilization. By a narrow margin, the Council chose partnership over containment, recognizing that humanity had already demonstrated the ability to outmaneuver their intelligence services and tactical planning. The alternative, attempting to contain or eliminate a species that had been systematically preparing for exactly that scenario, represented a conflict that no one was confident they could win. 3 months later, Alex Reed graduated from the Galactic Defense Academy with honors that reflected his actual capabilities rather than his carefully maintained mediocrity. His classmates, who had spent years unknowingly training alongside the most tactically gifted mind in the galaxy, finally understood why their exercises had always seemed to flow with unusual coordination and why their group projects had consistently achieved results that exceeded their individual abilities. But Alex's true impact became apparent during the galaxy's first external crisis since humanity joined the Alliance. When an invasion force from dark space threatened civilized worlds with extinction, the defense was coordinated not by traditional military hierarchies but by a quiet human who had spent years studying every species' capabilities and learning to orchestrate their combined potential into something greater than the sum of their individual strengths. The invaders had expected to face a collection of separate civilizations with predictable tactical doctrines and limited coordination capabilities. Instead, they encountered a unified force that fought with perfect understanding of each member, species' psychology and abilities, turning their own numerical advantage into a strategic liability through tactics that made their superiority in technology and numbers irrelevant. The battle was won not through overwhelming firepower or advanced technology, but through a level of strategic thinking that turned the invaders' assumptions about galactic military capabilities into fatal weaknesses. Alex Reed, the quietest cadet in his class, had become the voice that coordinated the galaxy's defense and demonstrated why humanity's place among the stars had never been in question. The galaxy learned that humanity's gift wasn't superior technology or physical capabilities. It was the ability to understand their allies so completely that they could coordinate diverse species into unified forces capable of achieving impossible victories. The quiet human sitting in the corner hadn't been studying to become a warrior. He had been learning to become the strategist that the galaxy would someday need to survive. And when that day arrived, he was ready.